The video today is going to cover the use and the threading of our Lockstitch machine. Before we start with the threading, we're going to cover some basic health and safety. So what we have to consider is if we have long hair, as myself, we need to keep it tied back because we have mechanisms that move here, and it's important that we don't get trapped if our hair is to fall forward. Also, another thing to consider is if the machine is switched on or not, as this one is switched on and you can hear that there is no noise. It is a silent motor. So we need to be aware that our feet don't catch on the treadle and cause the needle to move. Even when our machine is switched off, there is energy stored within the motor that can cause the mechanism to work if we catch our foot on the treadle. So either we get rid of all the energy, as we've just done, or keep our feet away from the treadle when we're threading the machine so we don't get caught on the needle. Other parts of the machine are our stitch size dial. The highest point on the dial represents the stitch size you'll be using. So 2.5 is our industry standard, and the lever below, if we depress, is our reverse. If we wish to control the machine stitch by stitch, in the direction of the arrow on the flywheel at the side, we can just turn this and we can control the machine stitch by stitch. So now if we talk about threading our machine, when we're using cotton thread, it is often quite floppy. There's not a lot of control when we're trying to get through into the holes at all our different angled points. So a little trick I use is I fold it over on itself and twist together. This gives me a lot more control over the end when we're trying to put it through a hole. So that's just a little tip I use myself that you can follow. Now on the Lockstitch machine, we have 2 reels of thread. The one on the right is used to thread the bobbin, which we'll do a separate video on. And the one on the left is for the Lockstitch machine itself. So what we've done today is we've tied together a black and a white thread for you to see. And I'm going to pull it through and talk you through the threading process as we go. So the first thing we do is we come to the spool pin here. As a reel of thread is called a spool. And the thread comes from the back of the spool pin to the front, then wraps round in a spiral to come from the back to the front of the spool pin again. We then go through the hole at the top of what is our pre-tensioner disc. And what is important here on the discs that the thread goes all the way between, not just rests on top. So if we pull through there, and then it goes over the top and down through the hole underneath. If we keep pulling our thread, we come to the main tensioner. Again, there are 2 discs there. We need to make sure we get through. It wraps itself underneath, comes back on itself and gets caught in our little spring. So what we have to think of here, these discs are controlling the rate the thread flows through the machine in relation to the speed we are going. So it is trapped right in between, not sitting on top, or otherwise our stitch won't be the correct tension. It goes through a little hook here at the side, up and through the pickup hook, back down the other side through a little guide. There's a hook at the base here of our needle bar and a hole which it goes through. I'm just going to pull through enough. We're going to cut off the end and we're going to thread the needle. Now you need a nice sharp end to your thread, no wispy ends coming off. And we thread from the outside of the machine to the inside. So we go from left to right. when we pull through, make sure it doesn't get caught on our needle guard. Then we hold the thread under a little bit of tension. We turn the wheel towards us, following the arrow. It will go down and pick up the bobbin thread. So you can see we have our other thread. If we raise the foot, we can use our tweezers underneath or our little scissors to pull the thread through. What we don't want to use is our fingers. Then the two threads go between the toes of the foot and to the back of the machine. And then we're ready to stitch. So with our fabric here, our raw edges together. If we use the edge of the foot as a guide, this gives us a 5mm seam. So we can start stitching. We can depress the lever, it will go in reverse, carry on. The needle at the highest point means the thread will pull easily from the back. We can cut our thread ends off and then check the stitch on the machine. The stitch should look the same on the back and the front, and then we know that it's threaded correctly. If there's any issues with the stitch, that means we've usually missed one of our tension discs, and then we just rethread that and we're good to go. Another thing, if we're using the machine and we're using a smaller reel of thread instead of the larger ones we have in the studio, we need to place this on top of a large reel, because the metal rod here we have for the spool holder, the thread will wrap round otherwise. So if we're using a small reel, just please put it on top of a large reel to pull it through. And that's the threading of the top of our Lockstitch. So other points to discuss on the Lockstitch machine that are a little bit different if you're used to a domestic are the treadle, and we have a knee lift. So a treadle on an industrial is a larger pad that means we can put our 2 feet on it together. This is what it's designed for. I find it slightly easier to control by offsetting my feet slightly. Now I'm right-handed, right-footed, so my right foot, the toe, tips slightly over the edge of the treadle, so a little bit of pressure makes it easier to control, and then I can come back on my left foot to stop. So it's a stop and go motion with our feet. Now, if you're used to a domestic machine and you find it difficult to use the two, you can put your one foot to one side out of the way of the treadle and then just control it with the one. But it is designed to hold your 2 feet. Now, we also have a knee lift. So the idea with your knee, you control the foot on the machine. So as you push against the knee lift, the foot rises. This means when we have work under the machine, our hands are free to control the work, not that we have a lever on the back like a domestic. So those are 2 other factors which differ greatly than your domestic machine.